Hey, what's going on guys, and welcome back to the channel. As you guys can see from the title of the video, we're talking all about the barbell squat. Let's waste no time and jump right into it. Grip, stance, and leg drive are going to make up the three main components of the barbell squat. When you think of the barbell squat, you want to start from the ground up. So focusing on your stance is the first thing we want to do. Now, the type of shoes that you wear does matter. Typically, wearing Olympic weightlifting shoes will allow you to squat deeper than wearing more flat-soled shoes. Olympic weightlifting shoes include a slight heel wedge in the back of the shoe that raises your foot just slightly, which allows you to have a little bit more balance and stability as you squat down. So no, this doesn't mean by wearing Olympic weightlifting shoes that you're necessarily cheating or not focusing on improving your own natural body's abilities. But what's oftentimes overlooked is the repetitive movements that we've done for years and years that may not be as reversible. If you played a variety of different sports or you spend a lot of time on your feet, as most of us do, you're going to only have but so much ankle flexibility as you get older. And at a point, your ability to improve your mobility is going to be limited. So for the majority of us, our ankle mobility is only going to be able to get to a certain state. Again, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't work on it, but you might not be able to notice that your ankle mobility is that of something of a toddler's. Typically, when you wear more flat-soled shoes, your balance isn't going to be as stable as you might see with something with a slight wedge to the heel. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone who wears flat-soled shoes isn't going to feel balanced and stable. And if you choose to wear more flat-soled shoes, I'd highly recommend making sure that you're wearing shoes that allow you to really spread out your toes. This will help you to grip the ground and stay more stable all throughout the squat. As I stated, the squat is worked from the ground up. Your big toe, your pinky toe, and your heel are all 3 points of contact that you should be focusing on as you squat down. Trying to keep even pressure in these points of the foot should keep it mostly flat as you squat down and allow for you to feel balanced and in control all throughout the movement. When you perform the squat, you want your feet to be roughly shoulder width apart. If you're shorter or have shorter femurs, a more narrow stance might feel more comfortable. But if you're slightly taller or someone like me who has longer femurs, having a shoulder width or slightly wider than shoulder width stance is probably most optimal for feeling comfortable. An even wider stance outside of the shoulder width is something that we don't see very commonly. Unless someone's a competitive powerlifter who's looking to maximize the amount of weight they can move in order to hit a certain depth, it's not very common to have a super wide stance. Typically, having a wider stance can increase your risk of injury, especially if your hip mobility isn't one that's most favorable to your stance. So my recommendation, again, would be to have a stance that's about shoulder width apart or slightly outside of it. Most people have to do a tiny bit of trial and error to figure out what feels most comfortable for them. Once your stance is set, again, you want to keep working your way up the chain from the ground up. The next most important thing we want to talk about is your knee drive. Now that your feet are planted on the ground, they're nice and flat, you feel stable, you want to focus on making sure that as you squat down, you take your time. As you descend down into the squat, you want to take roughly 3 seconds on the way down. The depth you want to hit is below parallel. So this means that your hip crease is going below the depth of your knee when looked at from the side. As you hit this depth, one of the most important things is to make sure that your knees are driving away from one another so that you're not only focusing on targeting your quadriceps, but you're also engaging your glutes as well as keeping your calves and upper body stable. One of the best cues I've ever heard for performing a squat is to think about sitting your hips into the corner of the room. Think about where the floor and the wall meet. If you think about sitting your hips into that crease, you're more than likely going to be moving in the general right direction. You want to think about, as you come out of the squat, driving your chest to the opposite corner of the room. This will help you to make the movement slightly more back and forth at about a 45-degree angle rather than an up and downward motion. When you think of the squat this way, you'll be able to engage the muscles that are involved to a high degree, while still ensuring that your form is safe and controlled. The main muscles involved in the squat are going to include all the muscles of the quadriceps, so the rectus femoris, the vastus lateralis, the vastus medialis, and the vastus intermedius. You also have the glute major and the glute minor that are involved highly, as well as you have the gastrocnemius and the anterior tibialis of the calf that are used to stabilize as you squat down. Other lesser involved muscles are going to include the abdominals, as well as muscles in the upper back that'll help you stabilize the barbell as it rests on your back. Based upon the length of your torso and your limbs, should determine how you grip the bar and ultimately place it onto your back. If you have a slightly shorter torso, performing a low bar squat where the bar rests a little bit lower on the back, about mid-trap, it will probably be most beneficial for most people. If you have a slightly longer torso, a high bar squat may be even more beneficial. So as I mentioned earlier, I have slightly longer femurs and my torso is on the shorter side. So typically when I squat, I do perform a low bar squat. This allows me to feel not only comfortable with the bar resting on my back, but it allows me to put a lot of power into the lift, which over time will allow me to use more weight, and ultimately I can increase my rep schemes as I see fit. Now, even if I had the same length in my femurs as I currently do, but my torso was slightly longer, the low bar squat might still feel slightly more comfortable than a high bar squat because of where the bar would be positioned in relation to my feet if you were to look at my squat from the side. The path that the barbell travels as you squat down is highly important for determining whether your squat is being performed correctly. If the bar moves in a back and forth pattern as you squat down rather than an up and down pattern, you'll notice that you don't have as much balance throughout the squat, and ultimately you may be favoring one set of muscle groups over another. So by focusing on keeping the bar in a pretty straight, narrow path when viewed from the side, should allow you to not only feel more comfortable, but again, to be able to target all the muscles of the squat a little more evenly. If you're performing a low bar squat, having a slightly wider grip tends to be a little bit better for most people to feel in control and stable as they rest the bar on their back. But again, this isn't necessarily the case for everyone. So you might do the low bar squat and have a slightly closer in grip and feel totally fine. If you're performing a high bar squat, again, a slightly more narrow grip might be most comfortable for the majority of high bar squatters. But like I said, this isn't a set in stone rule. So if you like a slightly wider grip as you perform the high bar squat, that's totally fine too. A really great cue to think about as you grip the bar is to think about pinning your elbows in towards your body as tight as you can, or think about breaking the bar in half. If you watched the last video where I went over the barbell bench press, you know exactly what I'm talking about as far as snapping a toothpick in half. It's the same concept that you want to apply when holding onto the barbell for the barbell squat. Some common alternatives for the barbell squat are going to include movements like the leg press, hack squats, and Smith machine squats. Now there are some specialized gyms out there that do have extra pieces of equipment like the pendulum squat, which will also allow you to do a similar movement. And if you don't feel that comfortable with the barbell squat, or maybe you've encountered an injury, hopefully you have availability to some of these alternatives. Probably the most comparable movement to the barbell squat, though the variation is drastically different, would be the leg press. With the leg press, you're going to be involving the quads, the glutes, and again, stabilizing with the muscles in the calf. The only difference is your upper body isn't involved as much. Now, this doesn't mean that you can necessarily replace your barbell squats with the leg press. And in a recent Q&A with exercise scientist James Krieger, he actually talks about this and how the leg press, even though it is a really great alternative, probably doesn't fully replace a barbell squat. The benefits that you can achieve from the leg press are very great, but overall, probably not as powerful as the barbell squat. But again, if you're overcoming an injury or you don't feel that comfortable with the squat right away, there are other alternatives too that can help build this outside of just the leg press. Movements like the goblet squat or even the box squat are great for learning the mechanics of how you should be performing any sort of squat. And in particular, you can translate this to your barbell squat. As I mentioned earlier, the hack squat as well as Smith machine squats are also great alternatives. But where they differ from something like the leg press is they may favor the quads a little bit more with a movement like the hack squat. And depending on how you set up for your Smith machine squat, you can choose to target more of the quad or put a little bit more emphasis on the glute. Now overall, that's not a bad thing, especially if you're looking to favor one of these muscle groups over another. But to pretty much mimic what you would receive from the barbell squat might not be the exact case for the Smith machine squat and the hack squat. Lastly, it's super important that when performing the barbell squat, you want to make sure that your form stays consistent all throughout the lift. Rounding in the lower back, letting the knees cave in, or even letting the bar roll forward on the back are all signs that you're probably not stabilizing as best as you should be. Remember, you want to make sure that you're sitting your hips towards the corner of the room and then driving your chest towards the opposite corner of the room as you squat down. Your knees want to drive away from one another, and you want to make sure that your feet are nice and stable. Now, I know that there's a lot more that we could go in depth with the barbell squat, but just like the last video, we're going to have more that we're going to go over all throughout this series. And if you're subscribed to the channel, you know already I talk in depth about all of these things. That's going to wrap up the video right here. Thank you guys again for tuning in, and comment below another movement that you want me to go over, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.